Welcome to Project Chatter, the podcast where PPM experts from various sectors talk about the latest trends. Listen to Val and Dale as they talk about tried and tested best practices and share their unfiltered thoughts about the industry. Whether you're here to learn how to progress your career, improve your project control skills, or just want to hear an Aussie and South African rant about projects, then you've come to the right place. Welcome to the Project Chatter podcast with your hosts, Dale Fung and Val Matthews.
In this week's episode, we were joined by John Ryan to discuss Product Lifecycle Management. John is a seasoned project director and construction technology leader based in London. He is a co-founder at Samtera, which is an innovative platform focused on streamlining communications and site reporting by eliminating paper workflows and unmanageable messaging chains.
With an extensive background managing complex engineering projects, John has held senior roles at Tideway London, Transport for London, Network Rail, Laing O'Rourke and Tube Lines. John also serves as a board member for the British and Irish Trading Alliance Rail Division, reflecting his commitment to excellence and industry collaboration within the construction and infrastructure sectors. Throughout his career, he has demonstrated expertise in project and design management, overseeing large-scale transport and infrastructure initiatives across the UK. Well, today's was an interesting episode. It turns out we haven't actually done a product lifecycle management in depth before. I'm sure we both thought we'd done it, but turns out we hadn't. So it was really interesting going through that. Talking about things like CapEx and OpEx and how it all works out in different industries. But what were your main takeaways there, Dale?
Yeah, no, you're right. It feels like we have, but maybe we've tiptoed around product lifecycle management before. But this one was great. You know, John really made it real in terms of how projects fit into a product lifecycle. What lenses we can approach and apply to projects to ensure that we're considering the full lifecycle management, how I guess owners, clients see maintenance versus contractors delivering projects, and perhaps how we can incentivize delivery of projects into the maintenance phases of a product lifecycle as well. So yeah, a fascinating one from me, John, is also really focused on outcomes in terms of environment as well, and how he builds that into his thinking when he thinks about, you know, not just project costs in terms of monetary terms, but the environmental cost as well. How about you, Martin?
Yeah, it was quite a practical insight into it, because sometimes it can be quite abstract as a concept. We actually talked about how it's taught at university and how people kind of get sidetracked when they go into big businesses. Just talking about some of how it differs between first world and third world. But yeah, we won't give away all the secrets there.
No, we won't. We'll leave it there, shall we? Listen to this one, folks. I think you'll find it quite intriguing if you work on products or projects. So as we say, keep listening, keep liking, and keep paying it forward. Hello, project people, and welcome back to another episode of the Project Chatter podcast. We have an amazing season, as we've been saying the first few episodes, and we have yet again another fantastic guest on this episode. Before we jump to him, though, Martin, how are you doing?
Yeah, all good, thanks. You?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you. Are you missing Val?
Yeah, again, absent again.
Yeah, okay. Well, at least it's one of us that's missing him. Val, we love you secretly. Look, let's jump to our guest, Mr. John Ryan. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast. How are you doing?
Good. Not too bad at all.
Good stuff. So, for the small amount of people out there that don't know who John Ryan is, do you mind sharing a bit of a brief synopsis of your origin story? Who is John Ryan? What do you do? What's your career to date? And why do you find yourself where you are now?
So thanks for having me on the podcast, lads. So it's good to be here. Backstory, I'm an engineer by trade, studied in Ireland, obviously accent Irish, so it's going to be quite difficult to do double time on the old podcast listening to me, but you can try. Worked in high precision engineering in Italy, and then ended up in a graduate scheme in Tube Lines in London, which is part of London Underground now, and kind of worked in rolling stock, and then I ended up going into the refurb and modernisation of tube stations in London. For those that don't know or haven't been, these are very, very old, over 100-year-old subsurface railway stations that even had steam trains in them. And moved on since then, obviously. And my career kind of very much went into the railway, into engineering roles, into DPE, in the designated project engineer, chief engineering type roles in Network Rail, working on things like Crossrail, other rail projects related to the Olympics, London Overground, which is quite a phenomenal project to be involved in twice. And then I ended up working on Tideway Super Sewer, where I was a senior project manager on the western section of that one, helping teams delivering the 3 sites, Acton, Barnelms and Hammersmith, which are connecting into a major sewer network to try and protect the River Thames from sewer outflows. So quite a engineering focused, complex mega projects. Really enjoyed that side of things. Got bogged down in paperwork and documentation. And then with Sarah, we co-founded a company called Simterra, which is very much focused on communication from the ground up, human-centric insights for teams on the ground to share with the wider organization to better run projects of all shapes and sizes. So that's kind of where career path and my story and those things. But always in the side of things, I've always been interested in better design, better product integrations, adoption of the latest technology, but also how can we do things better, faster, more efficient, reducing rework, recost works. But also as a side project was very much kind of focused on the environmental aspect of things, of how do we reduce wastage, how do we make sure things are fit for purpose, and that we can go off and have better kind of life cycle management has always been a very interesting thing for me to understand that.
Wow, absolutely glittering CV there. And you're involved in so much. How do you sleep? There's so much going on there. But
a lot these days.
But I think it's all coming together nicely from what from the topic that you've brought to the table to discuss, and hopefully provoke some thoughts from the listeners. And the one you brought to the table is product lifecycle management, and perhaps some of the things we could borrow or not borrow, lessons learned perhaps, or transferred into project delivery. And so it'd be interesting to discuss this, perhaps for a lot of the listeners that are in project management, project delivery, project controls. They might not be too familiar with what product lifecycle management is all about. And so if we could frame that for them, set a baseline, so to speak, how would you sort of frame product lifecycle management if someone's hearing and listening to this for the first time before we delve in?
Before they disappear off the podcast and going, this is not for me. So the big interest for me on this side of things has been in my background in being an engineer and making products for client organizations. When I came into kind of the construction environment, mega projects and delivery, you have 2 sides of delivery. One is CapEx, the other is OpEx. So CapEx, capital delivery. Typically I'm on CapEx side is where I kind of think somebody gives me £1 billion, go build me a railway. I'm happy to go off and build said railway. When I hand over, let's say Crossrail, when you hand over Hinckley, you hand it over into the OpEx side of things, was the operational expenditure side of things. Typically the CapEx team want to go off and build quick, fast and as cheaply as possible and not provide any spares. Throw it over the fence to the operations team and run away onto the next big project. Because it's cost a lot of money. The operations team have got a budget to manage and maintain an asset for 50, 100 years plus side of things. And if you think about nuclear, your decommissioning is measured in hundreds of years afterwards. So you've got this conflict between 2 parties, is that the CapEx team want to build fast, quick, and as simple as possible, but not for something that's going to have the life cycle that's going to last that extra time. So if we were, for instance, going to go off and have better trains to buy them and have a longer and a lower operational costs and maintenance, that is a much higher capital expenditure upfront to go off and do that. So when you think about everything in your life of what you're buying, you can buy something cheap and quick in a basic store, or you buy something a little bit more expensive that you know is going to last longer. And this is everything from buying your basic toasters, buying basic bicycles, rollerblades, whatever you want to go off and spend your cash on, or headphones, as Martin's got on him. You can spend the best money and buy a Bose high quality, Pilot's one that's going to cost you £800 to £1,000. It'll do exactly the same job as the one that you're getting off Temu or one of those other kind of sites at the moment. You got the app, but the lifespan of it will not be there. And that's the big balance that we have in project management, in construction, in infrastructure, primarily, because a lot of it, as you know, a lot of our backgrounds in asset management, is that balance between spending that extra bit of money on the CapEx side, if we've got the cash for it, and then being able to go off and reduce the cost across the board for the operations team. And the problem is that I've been given £1 billion to go and build something. I don't get any extra cash for spending a bit more to reduce the spend over the next 20, 30, 40 years for the operations team. So that balance is quite difficult to kind of get, and understanding that has been a really big interest for me across the board.
So if I jump in there, that's thank you for setting that and the context of projects versus the product lifecycle. I think now listeners understand, okay, I see where you're coming from. I guess the first question to me is who's responsible or accountable for overseeing that end to end? Because we hear titles like product manager. Is it the product manager? Is it the asset owner? Who is it? Typically, I know it probably has different titles in different organizations, but what does that person look like? What's their roles and responsibilities in the organization, and how might they interact with projects to ensure that there's this overarching view? Because you probably want to throw into it, or maybe you don't, perhaps outcomes and benefits management as well. I don't know. And in different organizations, you might have sponsors, as I say. So yeah, there's all these different titles that people listening to this might go, how does this all fit in?
Yeah, and this is kind of where, is there ever one product manager within an organization, and that person leading it is quite difficult. So when we got like the client type organizations, and primarily we're kind of looking at your big infrastructure kind of companies, they're typically owner operator type setup. And that allows them to go off and have a longer view on what they're doing. Now, when you look at other organizations who are the delivery companies who are undertaking the works on behalf of a client, and they're doing the CapEx side, or they're doing the maintenance as well, they're only interested in delivering what is on the spec sheet and what they're being paid to deliver, or they're maintaining what's there at the moment, but they're not interfacing with or influencing future capital delivery projects. So you end up having this very small, narrow gap that if we look at it just being the owner side of things and the client organization, then you're looking at splitting them into two groups. One is owner operators, and one is kind of a leasing type company organization. So for instance, Network Rail would be nearly an owner operator and a leasing type setup. And by that I mean they manage the infrastructure in the P-way, as in the tracks within the railway and the signaling, but they don't operate or manage the stations. They typically lease them out to train operating companies, TOCs, or freight operating companies, the FOX. So you have that kind of lease agreement and owner-operator where they do have a very longer view of what they've got going on. And then also, in some ways, they've got a kind of a shorter one of, we're leasing out 25 years, you manage it, you upkeep it, and you hand it back in pretty much the same conditions I'm interested in. So you've got that balance that comes in. The product managers typically don't really kind of exist. They're more of an asset management team, is where they kind of are in the infrastructure side of things. And they kind of very much kind of look at it holistically across the board of what we can go off and do, what capital delivery projects are coming up, what maintenance activities we've got, and what do we need to go off and renew, repair, replace as necessary, or what can we just keep maintaining the existing kind of asset management side of things. So there's a big gap between, can we keep spending, let's say, £1 million a year on doing bridge inspections, or do we need to get rid of all of our bridges and spend 10 billion and get all the roads out of the way and everybody goes to hover cars? You know, you have that capital, you have to go off and assess this one. And it becomes then also, how do you spread that cost over time? We're also talking about decades. You're then taking into account inflation, interest rates, population changes, dynamics of that, the environment. Working from home changed a lot of things in the infrastructure side of things, on transport. It changed kind of things on water distribution as well, that it wasn't all kind of centralized in different areas at different times, as well as electricity. The rise of data centers is another kind of very, very heavy energy consumption kind of companies, and electric vehicles as well is going to come into it. So the product owner role, or the asset management team, has to be a very, very complex piece to understand just the holistic overview of what you're doing, never mind when you get into individual components about what type of unit we're doing, the service specification, the performance requirements, and also then how do we go off and justify spending a lot of capital up front to save us money in 50 years' time when we're not sure if we're even going to be still owning the company or still leasing that asset. So it's
not always straightforward, and I get that it's complex because there's various lenses and various, I guess, roles and responsibilities in organizations. But I think it gives people an idea of what types of people, roles, interests, different functions in organizations have on the product, if we can call it that. One that sprung to mind there when you brought up sort of, perhaps a main contractor, delivering on behalf of a client. And is there room for incentivizing delivery in a sense for the on cost, the life cycle maintenance costs in a contract when you're contracting out to deliver the project? How does that work? How does that look like? You said there, for example, we may be able to spend more delivering the project for lower costs, maintenance costs, and operational costs in the future. Are contractors now rubbing their hands, going, "Oh, fantastic! I can make more money"? How does that work?
It works in a few interesting ways. So sometimes you might have an organization where it's just capital delivery, and just capital delivery to contractor, and they're just, let's get it in, and they got a Gantt chart and everybody excited, and got CPIs, KPIs, earned value, and all the rest of it. And they completely ignore the fact that we have to hand it over to somebody at the end of the day. At the end of the day, that person comes in and they're kind of going, I'm not accepting that. And it's like going, well, why not? Well, it's not fit for purpose. You've changed all the equipment. None of my team know how to use it. You need to train us, support us. Where's my 3 spares for everything you've just invented? And all of a sudden, the whole project gets delayed because they ignore the fact that there's actually an owner, operator, maintainer at the other side, who, if there's a large organization, they might have a framework contract for multi-year deal for a supply chain to deliver to their specification for widget X, and you've invented widget Y and Z that were cheaper and kept your costs down and saved you 4 days on the project. But actually, you're going to spend now 6 weeks now and triple the costs to go off and redo that one. So not understanding that you're building something to hand over to somebody is quite a key thing. The maintainer operator does have a very strong voice in this, of until they accept it into practical completion, beneficial use, all those other kind of key terms we see in contracts, you're stuck maintaining an asset that you don't really do because you're not an asset management company. So understanding that, your stakeholders, early engagement, mitigation, minimizing risk, optimizing your design based around, well, what's good practice currently? The existing assets or the existing product they're using in that field is not fit for purpose, isn't liked, continually fails. Well, would you be interested in changing? Do we want to go and do a development? And this is where everybody comes onto the same thing.
Are there any companies or places that are doing this stuff well? So, we always see a lot of UK infrastructure projects getting a bit of a batter in. We're seeing stuff like HS2 getting done over a longer period of time, kind of similar to what you just said there. You've got Lower Thames, which is taking $1 billion to get a bit of planning consent. Are there things that we've actually done well as a country in the last 25 years in relation to product lifecycle management?
That's a whole other podcast of what has the UK done in the last 25 years. The not in construction. The industry is so fractured in the construction, in a asset management, infrastructure side of things, that it's pretty much, you're verging on impossibility to go off and do it. So you've got quite a lot of different kind of characters coming into all of this, and every single person has got a different interest in what they're trying to do. And therefore, you end up having so much conflicting interest that it doesn't kind of work out. Where it does work is in manufacturing. If you think about things, and by manufacturing, I primarily am looking at like aircraft manufacturing side of things. They are very much focused in on delivering a product that then they can maintain afterwards. So when you've got an aircraft, you lease it, possibly from one of the leasing companies, or you buy it outright as a company, and then you buy engines on top of that. For those that don't know, you don't actually buy an aircraft as is, you lease engines as well, and you can swap your engines out across the board. So for nervous flyers, this is probably the bit that you need to go off and mute. And so what you do is you kind of get the aircraft, you buy your aircraft, lease your engines, and then Rolls-Royce or others then will go off and they will maintain and manage your engine over time, because they've got all that kind of IoT devices, SCADA, telling them what's happening, thrust dynamics, usage, efficiency of the engine, any kind of issues, vibration, temperature, everything. So they understand what's happening across their engines. So they design, develop, approvals are quite complex for that side of things. That's quite important. And then they maintain that thing. So what they don't want to do is push something off the production line that then they can't manage, maintain afterwards. And a lot of these companies make a loss. And at home, you've got your printers you bought for 50 quid. And then the printer cartridge is 60 quid. It's cheaper to keep buying new printers every single week than it is to buy printer cartridge. So this is what those companies have seen. They do that kind of maintenance after as they make a loss on the engine, but over the life cycle of the engine, they will then make their money back on that one. So they are very much incentivized. And we talk about daily, your principal contractors and your designers. They're not incentivized to have the easiest, simplest, maintainable asset or infrastructure or train station or power station or whatever you've got, because they're not going to get any benefit or value. It takes more time to design something well, and they're not going to get paid for it. And on fixed price lump sum contracts where I want to design, you're not going to go off and put that extra effort in. At the end of the day, in 50 years' time, there's no kickback that if Martin did a great design, every year he gets royalties on doing a brilliant design that has enabled more passengers to go onto a train and reduce dwell time of trains and improve the capacity of the UK's rail network. It's not there. We don't. I'd love to have this because I did some nice designs on improving that. But we don't have that incentivization. We don't have that kind of kickbacks onto it. But we can learn from the manufacturer and other industries.
Do you think that that could be a way to solve it through incentivizations, or is it such a systemic, so many vested interests, like you said there? Like how can we fix this as an industry?
Yeah, I think you can kind of fix it with a proper kind of contract side of things. A lot of contracts are written of build me a thing and that's it. But actually, where's the kind of thing of we're willing to spend more money up front to get it right and therefore reduce costs and issues and problems later on. But the issue we've seen is that where does that money come from? And when you're looking at organizations that are in regulated environments where they've got 5 to 7 year cycles of work and they have to get that approved by the regulators and they get their budgets approved, being able to justify that massive bump in spend, and the water industry is going through that now with Ofwat in the UK, is that they're trying to go off and justify a much higher capital spend on across their business, which then obviously raises prices then for our water and our bills that people don't want to pay. So how am I going to get this cash in to build up that capital delivery to then incentivize designers, project managers, teams on the ground doing the CapEx works to optimize that, but also the maintenance teams to optimize them, going, no, we're not going to keep maintaining it. We're actually going to go off and do a side project to do a mini CapEx of improvement of maintenance to, in 20 years' time, to reduce our overall CapEx, our overall operation spend year on year per asset, or some kind of metric that we can do and incentivize that way.
Yeah, it's interesting, John. You bring up that view of Rolls-Royce and the airplane engines and the maintenance. You know, my previous experience working in defense is quite similar as well, where there's a loss leader, right, for the development work. But it hinges on that maintenance contract afterwards. But that got me thinking as you're talking there, should maintenance be built in from the outset of the project rather than an afterthought of what that would look like, to say, actually, we will maintain for X amount. And then you know that in order to achieve your economies of scale, your profitabilities through maintenance, you need to deliver upfront.
That would definitely re-incentivize the entire principal contractor or audience to go off and going, ooh, this is going to be expensive to keep going, isn't it? Maybe we should supply a few spares or make sure that we can actually access the components and be able to go off and change out. So that would be a game changer in a lot of it. And when you think about it, things like Tideway Super Sewer, which is kind of finishing in 2025, you've got like 10 years of whatever development of that project, but it's going to last for 120 years. So where's your money going to be there in that one? The maintenance side of things is quite a big contract that will kind of keep you kind of going and ticking over in the peaks and troughs within the construction and the infrastructure kind of environment. So incentivizing to move that way would be quite an interesting one to see how they would react to it. And
so let's play that out. Let's say that's a thing that the likes of your network rails, your TfL would start looking at now, perhaps, right? What are some of the hurdles we'd have to overcome based on the current commercials that we've got in place? Because incentivization it's not really looked at from a maintenance perspective. And here's the question, is that primarily because client organizations typically maintain it themselves, or is it outsourced? What are you finding?
A lot of it kind of they've started downsizing their own internal teams and outsourcing it. Some of it detrimentally, some of it have been set up very well. They've done well on that side of things. That's another kind of part of it. But let's assume that there's a good team working on it and maintaining it. it's usually seen as the easiest thing for an organization to start cutting costs on the operations side rather than invest in the operations and the maintenance and the upkeep of it. Because at the end of the day, it's not generating cash. So if we want, pick any train station wherever you live or any kind of road, you can go off and increase the capacity of the train station, have more trains, have more roads, and then you end up increasing more jobs at a business center, higher bandwidth on the internet, more power supplies for EV vehicles being charged, which then brings more people into your shopping mall, then the shopping mall. Polish the floor a bit better, improve the handrail kind of design, have nicer lighting to have longevity. The shopping mall doesn't care about that part of it. As long as people are coming through and the doors are big enough to get more people in and they're more attracted and the car park is big enough and the transport is good. At that point, the interest is not on the longevity of that asset as such. It's just make sure to keep it going, reduce operational costs as much as possible to maximize the profit margins across the board. And even if you're a maintenance company working for a client, you are incentivized to make a profit. So you want to make sure that whatever contract you've signed up to with your client organization, there's a profit margin within that. So you are not incentivized to redo the wall behind me or behind yourselves, or to improve the paint finish that it improves the scratch resistance, because you might only have a contract for a year, 2 years, 5 years, and you don't want to do some capital expenditure work that you don't get the immediate benefit for that possibly could benefit your competitor in 5 years' time if they've won the framework. So you end up having a very much a short-term kind of goal-orientated setup on that one, which isn't always kind of fit for purpose. Change that, as kind of Martin kind of raised, all of a sudden you've got this longer term, if we're not going to do this now, it might bite us later on.
Is the theory of this taught in university? So when people are doing their engineering degrees, I'm assuming there's a lot of focus. Do we all get kind of, we lose the interest, we get a bit more cynical when people join these big organizations and they are trying to reduce those operational costs? Like, is the theory of all of this properly taught in universities, in your view?
Yeah, very much so. Like and stuff. It's all got life cycle analysis is a massive thing. There's a whole British standard around life cycle analysis that you can go off and look into it. You have got the whole thing around the circular economy is a massive part of it. And if you look at kind of like there's like the OR framework is a big thing, which is the first thing on it is refuse to do anything, which I think is quite negative as a starting point. And then kind of like rethink, reduce, reuse, repair the existing things up kind of thing. So you're very much focus in on that one. And if you look at the whole ESG and environmental side of things and the Greta Thunberg type movement, don't take planes, don't fly, etc., you end up having a very big movement in this. There's a massive part of it of how do we reduce our consumption, the materialism, how do we simplify, and all of those kind of circular economy side of things. But then there's also the life cycle analysis of things is quite well established as a part of it. You got this, I think it's like the 14,000 series in British standards, and that's very much focused around life cycle analysis and kind of the management of these kind of things that allows you to go off and better assess it. Problem is that three of us are going to go off and do an assessment, and I'm the environmentalist, Martin's kind of, in the middle, and it's Dale's product. Dale's going to go off and say, well, mine's the best product ever. I'm going to go, well, actually, no, it's not. And then Mark's going, well, on the balance, it could be okay. And I saw one where a major coffee manufacturer had an assessment against a mocha pot. And for those that don't know, a mocha pot is just 5 or 6 bits of aluminium and plastic handle bolted together. And they compared their high-powered special espresso machine to that with over 200 components and said it was 85% of the life cycle CO2 equivalent of a mocha pot, which is just aluminium, squish it, make pot, add bits, done. And they said there are 200 components with electrical components, wiring, plastic, metals was 85% of the equivalent CO2e equivalent product kind of number of carbons made of it and stuff, whatever it's called. So that was quite interesting to go off and see that you can have 10 people doing the same life cycle assessment on the same product, but all have come from different aspects of how do I assess it? And I think their one was more of, well, ours will last longer. A mocha pot is not designed to last as long as our product is, and a whole bunch of other twisting and turning of the life cycle assessment, which means that people just misuse it. They change it. It's not always fit for purpose, and therefore it's quite difficult to do. Again, same thing with carbon credits is another thing, where it's a bit of a wild west of how do you actually calculate a carbon credit, and even what is it and how do you do it and the price of it and so on is a whole other thing to possibly use to help people kind of reduce their overall picture. But yeah, it's a massive thing, Martin. It's a really big thing, but at the end of the day, I'm told to do one job and I've got until Friday at 5:00 to finish it. Finish the design. We don't care about the rest of it.
Yeah, I was thinking there while you guys were discussing that the engineer studies is all great in university, and then they get into a job and encounter capitalism. But we won't go down that route.
Yeah. But in fairness, that is a key part of it. Like the manufacturer designer side of things, you are meant to design a widget, and it's meant to be competitively priced against other widgets in the market, and we're meant to make a profit margin on it. So how can I manufacture it as quickly as possible for the lowest cost? I'm not incentivized, unless I'm Airbus, to make the product, or Rolls-Royce, to make the product as easy or as maintainable afterwards. So as long as I'm just doing basic products, it's quite difficult for me to do it. The other thing is, if you think about the earbuds that you got, in kind of the Bluetooth kind of earpod type things, they get their waterproofness from gluing the components together. So they're just covered in glue to go off and protect them from a kind of water ingress and so on. And that is not very good for disassembly afterwards or maintenance of that bit of kit. But if you did go off and have a properly sealed and all the kind of gaskets and everything and beautifully engineered, the costs would be massive, the maintenance costs would be huge, and you would end up having some product that nobody would end up being able to afford and buy.
Very, very interesting. And one of the things that I was thinking about there, you mentioned circular economies, and we've covered off circular economies a couple of seasons ago, actually. But before I ask the question, actually, I'll ask a two-part question. One, can you sort of just basically describe what is meant by circular economies for those that haven't heard of that terminology before? And then two, perhaps some of your thoughts on how we can apply circular economies to projects and product lifecycle management.
Okay. Circular economy, there is the OR framework. So you can just Google that one and you'll find the diagrams and it's all very pretty. And so what it kind of comes into is a circular economy of different objects. So you might have your phone, for instance, you got at the moment, your mobile phone. And when you're looking at it's getting old, it's a bit crappy, the battery is going, etc. Use that as a simple example. So what you can do is on the OR framework, or 0 to or 9. I think there was an older version that had a shorter number, but we'll pick that or 0 to or 9 version. You can just refuse to have a mobile phone anymore. You can just adopt having, fax machine or go backwards into kind of having letters, which would be a fantastic way to go. You can rethink how you're doing things. So do you need an all singing, all dancing phone? Can you get away with a cheaper second-hand one that actually has very, very basic functionality and use your desktop computer for other things? Or you could also kind of have a simplified life within that thing as well, that you end up having to get rid of your tablet, get rid of your phone, your laptop, and go back down to a high-powered one new Pixel, Google phone or whatever. Then, if you kind of get that as a kind of base thing that you have to have a new thing, you have to change or you have to do something, you can then look at your existing phone. Can you reuse it? Can you repair it? Can you replace it, refurbish it, and move it on? So a lot of parents would have their phone and give it to their kids. So their kids are all on the iPhone 5 and you're on the new 6 or 16 or whatever you kind of got going on. You can also use some great companies. There's a lot of like iSmash in the UK and a couple of others that will do a refurb of your phone to replace the battery. There's a great website, ifixit.com, and you can go off and buy the battery and repair your own phone by yourself and refurbish it. And then you've also got kind of companies like Backmarket who do reselling or repurposing of stuff as well. So if in your company you've got 20, 30 laptops that are going to be replaced, what you can do is you can get and sell it onto the companies like Backmarket suppliers. They will then refurbish it, clean the hard drive securely, and then put it for sale then for other people that do not need a high-powered machine and stuff. So if you've got good quality equipment, we work a lot in kind of advanced tech. Our machines are quite powerful, but in a few years' time, we're going to be upgraded to something that can then handle the next wave of requirements. But those machines are still good, fit for purpose, and perfect for home use, basic students, and so on. And then finally, if we've explored all of those, and we can't get any further, then we're looking at the idea of then recycling or recovering stuff. So can we simply recycle this bit of kit? So it's a very simple kind of component that can be recycled easily, smelt down the metal, use it for another product. Aluminium cans or kind of quite a simple example of that one in your recycle bin, or we have to go off and do a disassembly and a recovery of the key components of it. So that's kind of breaking down your phone, taking out precious metals and so on. So that's pretty much your entire route from R0 to R9 and how you go off and do a circular economy. On the recycle recovery, that's your raw material that goes back into your manufacturing, or they're making components that are then used as part of the refurbishment repair. So one thing I could do is so when people, there's a lot of phone theft going on, they're not looking for your phone, they're looking for the screen, the batteries, and they just disassemble the whole thing, and then that's used in spares in some dodgy repair shops out there as well. So you end up having that kind of circular economy in a legal sense that's kind of going in that kind of direction as well. And what we can kind of think about in our own kind of space is when we're doing a work on a project, it is to look at the environment that we're doing the project and what can we reuse within this space. So one of the simplest ones is you look at the topography of a large project, and we need to go off and excavate this, but we need to build up this embankment. Instead of bringing in new material, virgin material to this, we're reusing and rebalancing the site. That's quite common by civil engineers to go off and simplify and adjust that one. You'd also look at what materials can we reuse of the existing building, what can we go off and dismantle, take a bit more time instead of just demolish, but dismantle it, touch it up, refurbish it, check it, QA it, and then bring it back in then into use into the new building or whatever you kind of got to go off and going on. More expensive, but it is another way.
Do you think there's a role for governments and regulators to almost mandate some of this stuff around circular economies, or is it very much on the private sector to be more innovative, to become more profitable?
It's too expensive. I can get a big dozer in and just knock a building down and just shove it to the side and build a new one quicker. I get off-site manufacture. It has to come from the governments and regulator. It has to come from the client organizations of mandating, thou shalt reduce this, you will use this, you will minimize, you will improve. And again, it goes back to what you're talking about, the contracts of, I think, Dale, you must maintain it for 5 years at your own cost would be a brilliant clause in a contract. Definitely a Z clause or an X clause in the NEC form of contracts. Just sneak it in at the end. I think you're just not incentivizing people to go through it. And when you look at kind of poorer countries, third world countries, you see a lot more repair shops going on. And a couple of months ago, our dishwasher broke down. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to fix it, how to order components for it. It was a pump, the sump pump at the bottom of the thing was gone. And it ends up, it was such an old model that they don't make that pump in that size and that kind of, as a major manufacturer. So they've all moved on. So I spent 6 weeks looking for these things that don't exist because nobody's incentivized to have 3,000 sump pumps on a shelf somewhere in the middle of the UK, just in case John calls up from London and says, I'd like to have a spare pump, please. It's not commercially viable to have that many spares. But in a third world country where the cost of labor is much, much cheaper and the cost of the washing machine is still quite high, there's a cost benefit analysis that someone's going to come in and actually refurbish that small little pump by themselves. So we've got that kind of problem where the cost of labor to do, let's say, a day's work on refurbishing that pump will cost more than the unit itself to replace it. So this is why we throw out our printers, we don't refurbish it, we don't care about it. But in other countries, you put the time and effort into it because that cost-benefit analysis is there to prove it. And sadly, go back to your question, Martin, in the UK and other kind of countries, that regulatory requirement is going to have to come in to make that change, which then means these companies in the middle are going to start making money on doing that work. So instead of demolition, it's dismantling, it's removing, it's quality checking, it's refurbishing. They're going to start making money, and that'll justify their existence because they can be a profitable business.
The other element you spoke about there, John, in terms of product lifecycle management was environmental impacts and factors. And in part, you touched on it, when you're explaining economies of scale, circular economies, etc. But I guess my question is, how do we build in environmental impacts of whole life costs? Because not just the money side of things. When you talk about, life cycle cost, there's the cost to the environment, the one that we live in, the one that gives us the fresh air we breathe. And part of it, I think, and it's quite well documented, is when people don't feel it personally, it's this thing out there that, emissions, global warming. It's not impacting me directly. It's this thing that's happening out there, right? So why should I do anything about it? What's your thoughts on how we build in environmental focus, I guess, on product lifecycle management in the project stage?
It goes back to the incentivization of people to look at the operational later on. We do have a lot of stuff that's changing in the construction phase of works, which is down to like LED lighting has been a fantastic invention for reduction of energy. We've got a lot of more focus on temporary power supplies on site and use of solar power and battery and so on. Electric diggers are coming in as well, which is going to make a significant difference at the capital spend side of things. And that's making a big difference across the board. And I think that's going to continue to be encouraged and move on. I think if you're a contractor at the moment and you keep adopting older technology and not looking at reducing your overall footprint, I think you're kind of putting yourself at a disadvantage. A lot of clients are looking at that extra differentiator between them and others to saying, do you take this into account? Do you take into account the stakeholder management? Are you looking to actively reduce, reuse, and recycle across the board? Simplification, better phasing of works. We do have one of the big things we haven't touched on is the cost of materials is going up. So we're looking at a significant rise in population across the globe. That is going to have a significant rise in consumption. Everybody's looking at the West and the consumerism and buying Levi jeans and Coca-Cola and taking a picture outside Big Ben and traveling and so on. So you're going to have that continual rise in cost of materials, cost of products, cost of production, energy, and we're losing a lot of kind of key assets across the board. Oil, gas, coal is a finite resource. So I think we're going to start seeing that optimization across the board. And if you're not thinking about doing that, then you are going to start losing because your rework cost in the construction industry, rework cost is about 20% of a project. So if you continue to just shove in any material and then cut it up to fit or get the angle grinders out every half an hour, you're just setting yourself up for failure. And this is kind of where you got your offsite manufacturing is doing very well because their loss of materials is a lot lower than just bringing a bunch of wood to site and just hoping for the best. And then you see it all scattered around the back of the site and they clean it up afterwards. That's a lot of unnecessary wastage that is just not needed anymore. And better planning can definitely reduce that one across the board if that company is willing to invest in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very, very interesting. As we were saying earlier, we live in this capitalist world, and one of the thoughts that popped into my mind was when you're talking about, potentially costs rising. I was thinking, is it really that, costs on airfares have risen because fewer people are flying, or is it that because costs have risen, fewer people are flying? What's the cause and effect in that one? And is that in itself a bit of a circular economy, a self-fulfilling prophecy almost, if you will, where, I need to raise them to recover from COVID, but because I'm raising them, fewer people are flying. So
there's a lot of movement in that one. As you're seeing across Europe, in 24, 25, there's a lot of people in Barcelona is kind of the most famous one of people pushing back on, we don't want more tourists, we don't want more people coming in. It's already flooded with people. You've got people renting out accommodation that locals can't get into and so on. So you have this kind of pushback onto things. And I think it is going to start becoming a problem as we're going forward, that we're going to have to go off and better think that out to be more competitive. And if you're not going to be competitive going forward, you're going to survive for the next couple of years, you're fine. But if you're thinking about where your company is going to be in 10 years' time, you need to be looking very, very seriously on an aging workforce. You've got a rising cost of materials across the board as the population growth continues. So if you're optimized around minimizing on plant equipment, materials, products, better optimization around maintenance and upkeep, then you're kind of fit for the future of 10, 20, 30 years kind of going forward. But how many people are looking that far is one of my problems, I think, in this one.
No, John, there's probably loads we can chat to you about. I know you've written a section in a book called Mechatronic Futures. And I think we've spoken about a lot about what you've written in there, but is there anything that we've missed and not covered that you want to share?
I suppose like for the audience, I think one thing was software was kind of that part of it. And we're seeing a lot of things coming up where, think about any of your phones, they're only good for about 5 or 6 years. Think about 2.8 years is the average lifespan for a phone. But even if you keep it going for 5 years, and I'm a BlackBerry user and I will always be, I'm still gutted by the fact that it's not there anymore. You can't keep that going because you've got software obsolescence going on within it. And what we've kind of seen is that as companies rise and fall and change and move and pricing goes up and so on, the core problem was being data ownership, access, privacy, and cybersecurity has been a critical part of it. So as we adopt a more data-centric, more software-integrated thing, everything from your toaster to your rocket ship is now linked on Bluetooth and Wi-Fi and all the rest of it. It's understanding data ownership, location of it, and being able to go off and going, look, it's my data at the end of the day, and the usage of it. Like, so that's kind of where I think it was Fisk Motors, they went bust in 24. And now the people in their cars, is the software going to be updated? Can I still drive my car? Is going to become a very, very big thing kind of going forward as a lot of companies adopt a subscription model to it. And you think a lot of major car manufacturers now have, if you want the extra deluxe feature in the car, you now have to pay an extra subscription to do things. I think BMW tried to charge for heated steering wheel app button as well, which kind of backfired on them. So I think that's a big change that we have seen. And the data aggregators and people who are doing this has been an emerging market within this life cycle and product management side of things that we haven't always taken into account. We think it's simply a physical good, but now you're relying on software companies and connectors of data. That is an emerging problem. And it's going to be quite interesting to see what's going to happen in the coming years in that one.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, folks, we will put a link to the book in the show notes, and you can go and read further what John was talking about there. But look, John, it's been amazing. Excellent to have you on the show. I think there's certainly a lot I got, and I know Martin has as well. I'm sure the listeners will get out of this too. Before we let you go, though, is there any final thoughts you want to leave with our listeners?
I think the best thing in this one is like not to get overwhelmed by the whole thing. I think it is something that everybody can kind of work on their own part of it and be part of the overall kind of thing. Even if you just learn something about this one, the OR framework, and take a small part of it into your business and sneak in a bit of environmental saving across the board without telling your boss, go for it. It's always kind of a good thing to go off and do. I think that's kind of a core part of it, that we can all do our little part in this,
Absolutely. And if we can get cost savings as well as, save the planet at the same time, even better. Look, folks, that is the end of this episode. But if you like what you've heard, please do help us pay it forward and share a link to this episode on your favorite social media. Once again, a massive thank you to our guest, John Ryan, and thank you all for listening. Till next time, we say stay safe, be disruptive, and have fun doing it. From me and Martin, it's bye for now.